I'm quitting, I'm leaving, this isn't sustainable, I need another job.
They say they hold the kids accountable, but they go to the office and they come back and they do the same thing.
Have been hit, punched.
Crazy, entitled, acting like they can say whatever they want to adults or whatever.
The students knowing that they can break the rules, the work just keeps being added on and on. We need our administrators to have our backs.
Whether your health or staying for the kids is worth it.
Like, no wonder I left teaching.
This weekend's deep dive is going to be another theory-driven discussion about two very similar and overlapping social phenomena that produce the same outcomes, but with very different public responses. And the reason this analogy that I'm about to break down works so well is because 75 to 80% of the teaching profession is women. These female teachers are explaining, in real time, why they're leaving classrooms, and their explanations keep circling around the same themes: being disrespected, lack of support, and expectations to continue caring in a career that no longer gives them the authority to actually do their jobs. So what I'm going to do here is use the teacher quitting trend as a reflection of what men experience relative to women and relationships. Once we connect the dots, it becomes very hard to not notice the overlap with what many men describe in dating, relationships, marriage, and family life. Now, to make sense of that overlap, I'll be putting up this graphic overlay throughout with directional arrows and other emphasis to help follow along. I'll also be discussing a few basic concepts from psychology and sociology, like role strain, learned helplessness, and operant conditioning, and how all of those help explain what leads to teachers and men to quit. I'll also discuss what it means for men more in my commentary. But for those of you who just want the quick and dirty, the basic lesson is this: men should recognize the pattern earlier and stop waiting for women or society to validate their experiences. My goal is to help you recognize a pattern and then to expose that pattern when men and women experience similar situations in which they've had enough and they've decided to walk away. But the public response, as I mentioned, is very different. So let's start with this. Teachers are not quitting because the job is hard. It may be easy to simply state that teachers are leaving because teaching is difficult, but teaching has always been difficult. More recently, the deeper issue is that teaching has become difficult in a way that strips those teachers of the conditions needed to do their jobs. Their comments are about disrespect in the classroom, lack of kids' boundaries, kids' emotional and physical outbursts, lack of consequences, and overload by being expected to do too much. Examples they give include students talking back or refusing to follow directions. There's no discipline in the home, they say. There's students are being physically abusive to teachers, and it all takes up so much of their time with behavior management that actual teaching is constantly interrupted. So they're no longer just teaching. Now they're also expected to discipline, to regulate kids' emotions, to document behaviors, answer to unruly parents, satisfy administrators' requirements, meet testing demands, all while protecting the learning environment and taking responsibility when any part of the system fails. And that is a perfect example of role strain. As shown here in this article that I recently found, I think it's just from 2025, role strain is the continued negative outcomes that occur when expectations within a role become too numerous, conflicting, or difficult to fulfill. Sociologists have studied this for decades, starting with William J. Good's work, which argued that people have limited time, energy, and emotional resources. So roles become stressful when demands exceed what a person can realistically manage. And that's one of the major reasons that teachers are quitting. So let's bridge this to men in relationships. Just like teachers, men aren't simply checking out because relationships are hard. They know that relationships require effort, sacrifice, communication, and compromise. But they're checking out because of excessive demands. It's an inability to protect their autonomy and boundaries and to prioritize their limited resources. For example, when he's told to communicate better after he's already explained a simple boundary 10 times, Or maybe he's expected to keep providing resources that involve his limited finances or his limited time, while his own concerns are treated as insecurity, selfishness, or emotional incompetence. So the comparison here is that teachers and men alike are placed in roles with responsibilities and demands which expectations remain high, but the patience and ability to fulfill those expectations continue to diminish. Let's move on here to collapse of authority. Classroom authority vanishes because the larger education system doesn't fully support teachers' efforts. As women are keen to post online, teachers describe parents working against them instead of with them. They describe parents questioning the teachers' reactions instead of their own children's behaviors. They also describe parents actively challenging grades and discipline. And in addition, administrators are reportedly excusing student behavior, failing to support teachers, and even undermining teachers when problem children are referred for discipline issues. And that's the collapse of authority. A teacher can be told 6 ways to Sunday to maintain her classroom's order or to reduce chaos in the hallways. But if teachers are refused authority and administrators reject consequences, then she has no control over outcomes. Which brings us to learned helplessness. This is a pattern that develops when people repeatedly experience that their effort does not change outcomes. So eventually they just stop trying. For example, Martin Seligman's research connected learned helplessness to personal characterizations such as motivation, control, depression, and ways in which people respond when they don't believe that outcomes can be influenced by their own behavior. And the same pattern often happens to men when society tells them that they're responsible for making relationships work, but also gives them little support when they call out women's disrespect, boundary violations, and unrealistic expectations. What we hear regarding men is that they're mean and toxic. They care too little and they're doing the bare minimum. Instead of understanding or acknowledging any of that from society at large, men get the same message that teachers hear from weak administrators. Do better, tolerate more, and don't be a quitter. Men may be told to lead in a marriage or a relationship, but if his leadership is described as control or manipulation, then he has responsibility with no authority. Now let's turn to the collapse of accountability in education. And by that I mean behaviors without consequences. In education, women describe students fighting and breaking rules with little or no consequence, along with parents who challenge teacher and school authority while defending their children's poor behaviors. Some even mention lack of support when kids' problems are escalated to the administrative level. And over time, that does much more than simply ignore the bad behaviors. It actually trains bad behavior and reinforces that it's acceptable. The common theory that we can apply here is operant conditioning, which is the basic principle that consequences, or lack thereof, shape future behaviors. When a disruptive or combative child's behavior is rewarded or dismissed, it's more likely to happen again. When kids and parents' disrespect are met with no meaningful correction from teachers or administrators, both students and parents learn that the behavior produces an outcome that benefits them. And as you can imagine, the same pattern plays out clearly in men's relationships. If women's emotional escalation gets her more attention, and if her boundary pushing results in no consequences for men, then her behaviors are being reinforced. Just like in a teaching context, when women's disrespect produces no meaningful consequences for men or society at large, they learn that the behavior produces an outcome that benefits them. From a man's perspective, the fact that conflict simply exists isn't the problem. The problem is that the current relationship landscape has become a behavioral system in which her behaviors are ignored or even rewarded by society. And that's when men stop seeing the relationship as simply difficult and start seeing it as a losing proposal. Now, the fourth common theme that I want to go over is system overload. When caring becomes guilt or shame that's used to keep people trapped. And this is where teachers' experiences become more than just bad student behaviors. More than just difficult classrooms, teachers are dealing with more and more effort that's required to perform their duties. That means everything from testing and tracking They have larger class sizes, more students in their classes. They're also dealing with parent hostility and administrative requirements. And they're expected to continue because the children need them. These female teachers report that more work is added to their job requirements, but without extra time or financial compensation to do it. They're buying their own materials, some of them crying in their cars in a parking lot. And they're feeling that the school system has turned against them. In fact, let's take this opportunity to give some stats here. RAND's 2025 report on teacher well-being gives us this. Just last year, teachers reported working an average of 49 hours per week. That's nearly 10 hours more than their contracted work week. Additionally, in 2025, teachers' intent to leave their jobs was at 16%. That's roughly 1 in 6 teachers reporting that they're somewhat or very likely to leave their job by the end of the school year. And a 2026 report just this year from the Learning Policy Institute adds to the broader turnover issue. That report states that about 1 in 7 public school teachers moves schools or leaves the profession each school year. And that turnover strains schools, it disrupts student learning, and weakens workforce stability. This is where moral injury plays out. No, I didn't make that up. Moral injury is the psychological and social damage to people's consciousness that occurs when they witness or fail to prevent acts that deeply contradict their own moral beliefs or values. It's characterized by intense guilt, shame, anger, and loss of trust in one's self. Teachers know what children need, including structure, discipline, affirmation, of course, also consequences, and they know that children need adults who are allowed to provide that leadership. But if the education system pressures teachers to lower standards or to just keep taking the punches while they keep smiling because it's for the kids, then the teacher is no longer just exhausted. Now she's participating in activities and dilemmas that violate her values. And that's moral injury. And it's the same thing that happens to men when care is used and weaponized as manipulation. Think of it like this. Men are told to stay because commitment is a sign of strength. They're told to communicate because relationships take work. They're told to be patient because she needs to be understood. And be vulnerable because she needs to know that you're emotionally intelligent. Keep trying, guys, because leaving means you're a quitter. But just like teaching, if the relationship is built on compromised authority, lack of accountability, and emotional volatility, that is a perfect storm. And in turn, men's caring is used to keep them trapped. That's the uncomfortable reality. Teachers are told to stay for children's benefits. Men are told to stay for women's benefits. In both cases, care is used as a lever for manipulation. So let's talk about that quitting and understanding that teachers leaving and men checking out are logical consequences. As I mentioned, role strain clarifies what happens when demands are unrealistic. Learned helplessness explains what happens when effort no longer changes outcomes. Operant conditioning shows why bad behavior gets worse and when there are no consequences. Also, as I mentioned, moral injury explains why people don't just get tired, but emotionally and entirely lose faith in whatever role it is. So when women leave classrooms, that's behavioral feedback, not simple labor market stats. And when men check out of dating and relationships, it's much more than just immaturity, fear of commitment, misogyny, porn, video games, or whatever lazy explanation gets thrown around this week. Men quitting is also behavioral feedback. Pew Research reported in 2023 that the share of single Americans looking for a committed relationship or casual dates dropped from 49% in 2019 to 42% in 2022. That's a drop of 7 points in 3 years, with the decline especially visible among single men. On a national level, teachers quitting and men walking away from relationships are both pretty big headlines, as you know. And in both instances, the deeper question is, what conditions make participation no longer worth it? That's the bridge. Teachers are not leaving because they suddenly hate children. Men are not checking out because they suddenly hate women. The common denominator is that they're both responding to roles that demand responsibility without authority and accountability without support. They have and are expected to show care without context and to sacrifice without receiving respect. So with everything that we know about human behavior, what else would we expect? If we remove consequences, bad behavior increases. If we limit authority, responsibility diminishes. If we remove support, commitment becomes self-sacrifice. And if people are shamed or guilted into participating in arrangements that they know are broken, they will eventually quit. So women check out from the teaching profession, and for the exact same reasons men check out from women. As I mentioned at the start, the reason that this comparison is useful is that teaching is a very, very heavily dominated female profession. So many women already understand this experience in one context. They know what it feels like to be disrespected, unsupported, second-guessed, and liable for other people's behaviors.
Have been hit, punched,
Crazy, entitled.
They come back and they do the same thing.
We need our administrators to have our backs.
Like, no wonder I left teaching.
And still be expected to keep caring and to keep trying without sufficient support. My argument is that many men are describing something remarkably similar in dating and relationships, even if women don't recognize it when men report the same experiences. Yet when women leave the classroom, the public is increasingly willing to recognize it as exhaustion, burnout, and even a rational response to an impossible condition. These female teachers get empathy because people understand that the education system is asking too much, giving too little, and then begging teachers to not leave. But when men describe the same experience in dating and relationships, they don't get the same interpretive generosity. Instead, they're defined as avoidant, emotionally available, or bitter. Although, as I mentioned, they're describing the same phenomenon. All of which reveals how selective empathy is applied between the genders. When women leave a broken role, they're lauded by society. But men? Well, that's a different reaction entirely. But why don't women get it? Why don't they understand and make this connection? Part of the reason women may not make the connection is that people often recognize unreasonableness, if you will, more easily when they are inside the perceived unjust role than when they benefit from the larger system. Female teachers are quick to talk about how destructive it is when students disrespect authority, when parents excuse poor behaviors, and administrators refuse to support them, because she is the one experiencing it. But in dating and relationships, the role position changes, and the same women don't recognize that men are describing the same pattern and how it affects them. People tend to notice burdens when they experience them, and they don't even recognize burdens when somebody else experiences them. So the teacher's experience gives them a familiar emotional reference point. If they can understand why a teacher eventually says, "I can't keep doing this," then maybe they'll finally understand why men say the same thing about relationships. One can only hope. Let me know your take, but I think the lesson for men is learn to recognize when social expectations have become a trap or unbearable even. If you're held responsible for the condition of a relationship and your existence in it, but your role is excessively strained, you may be in a losing role. And don't feel bad about leaving or for not participating if that's the case. Ultimately, men who keep tolerating disrespect without accountability are not saving a relationship any more than teachers who keep experiencing contempt without authority is saving a classroom. Men need to learn what teachers are learning the hard way. When a role requires responsibility without authority, accountability without reciprocity, and obligation without support, then leaving is not failure. Sometimes leaving is the most honest response to a system that has already failed. As always, thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope this one landed the way I hoped, and be careful out there. I'll see y'all soon.